Hi, everybody. It's David again, back with another episode of the Opposite of Cheating podcast. I'm here with my old good friend, Dr. Jason Stevens. He's a professor of psychological studies at the Faculty of Arts and Education at the University of Auckland in New Zealand. We've known each other 25, 30 years now. I think I'm thinking back to an AERA conference where we sat on a panel together when before I'd even met Trisha. Jason's one of the leading scholars of the moral education and development aspects of academic integrity. And I'm guessing you're all going to really enjoy hearing him talk about his work and perspective. So thanks a lot, Jason.
Hey, pleasure to be here, David. Always nice to talk with you. And yeah, thank you for the lovely introduction.
My pleasure. So would you tell him a little bit about the context down under in New Zealand and about the work that you've been doing all these years?
Yeah. I came down to New Zealand actually from in 2012, thinking I'd probably come down for 3 or 5 years, and it'll be my 14th anniversary, year anniversary in May. So yeah, you never know where life's going to take you. But yeah, very different context down here in the sense of how higher education is and so forth. We don't have a 40-year system. There's no freshman, sophomore, junior stuff. It's we call them stage one, stage two, stage three. Bachelor's degree is 3 years, not 4 years. So in the nomenclature of just yeah, what things are called and how things are done is quite different. Much more those who are familiar with like a British system would more readily recognize the New Zealand and Australian systems, I think. But it's great and it's really refreshing. For me, I was already in my 40s when I moved down here and had been in the, US system for 20 plus years. And so it was kind of refreshing to come down here. And especially as somebody who studies academic integrity and misconduct, I had done some cross-cultural work and I really wanted to, immerse myself in a different culture and context and test some of the ideas and theories that I had been working with. So it's been quite fruitful, and yeah, I'm still enjoying it and still learning a lot. By way of teaching, I am an educational. I got my PhD in educational psychology or psychological studies in education. With an emphasis on academic motivation and moral judgment and its development. And so I do teach courses, a large scale freshman course on it's called How People Learn. It's it's going on right now. I've got 390 stage one, that's first year university students. And very diverse. We Auckland itself is does not have a majority group. We're about 40% European, about 30% Asian, and 30% Pacific Islander, Indigenous Maori, and Samoan, Tongans, Fijians. So very, very diverse context. And So what else? So I teach a post-grad course as well, social psychology of the classroom and other stuff in between, and of course supervised doctoral students. I've got about 9 doctoral students right now, and a couple master students. Again, very international and very rewarding. Yeah.
Yeah, it really does. And the more we talk, the more I realize how those even the subtle differences turn out to be important.
Mm.
So let's go back to those days still in the US. What's your first memory of encountering this idea of academic integrity and how did you end up where you are?
Yeah. Uh, Yeah, that's kind of interesting one. I was somebody who, took a while, did a lot of grazing during my PhD and had a lot of false starts, as it were, on thesis topics. My advisor, Rob Roser, a very wise man, once said to me, Jason, bridges are for crossing over, not building houses on. And it's about the time that I said, all right, I got to get focused on a thesis topic. And I just happened to be going to, I was working at the Center for the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching with Ann Colby and Lee Schulman and on this project called Educating Citizens. And and we were looking at different universities, doing kind of case studies of universities that really seemed to focus on moral and civic development as part of not just their mission statements, right? Because everybody says they do that, but actually had, curriculum, co-curricular activities that really were meant to foster moral and civic development. Long story short, by way of preparation to a visit to Duke University, I came across this report that said that that most students, this is like 1999 or something, right? That most students cheated, and many believed it was wrong. And this was really at the heart of what I cared about, which was integrity, and integrity in the sense of not just honesty, but integrity in terms of integration of one's thoughts, one's spoken words or commitments, and one's actions. And so I had been looking at aggression in sports, and had done some work with youth in juvenile detention centers. And so I thought, wow, this is actually really an interesting place to, an interesting um, area to study the what's broadly known as the thought action problem or the judgment action gap, this failure of integrity, right, or lack of it, because
Hmm.
if it's so widespread. The majority of students, as we know, right, cheat at least once in the past year, right? Anywhere from 60, 70, 80%. High
Yep.
school, university, engage in at least one behavior, and many, think that it's wrong. So, really, for me, that's when I really started to focus on academic integrity as as really my topic space. And again, it was mainly with that theoretic interest on really the thought action problem, because of we fail to do that which we think we should do, and we often do that which we think we shouldn't do as adults in many domains, right? Where we probably don't tithe or give the money that we donate, or do things with our time or our money as much as we probably should. And I mean, there's hardly a day goes by, I think, that any conscious reflective adult doesn't confront a thought action problem.
Okay.
And Yeah, so yeah, so I've been wrestling with this, I suppose, and thinking about it for nearly 30 years. Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the things is I like to talk about your work when I give talks. And so instead of me doing it, I'm going to ask you to do it. If you had to pick one variable that you would want people to think about when thinking about the psychology of cheating, what would you pick?
Mm. Well, if you said the psychology of cheating, yeah, I think the one variable would probably be, it has different names. Freud would have called them ego defense mechanisms. Sociology, they're known as neutralization techniques. Albert Bandura called them mechanisms of moral disengagement. Some cognitive psychologists have called them social cognitive distortions. But really, they're more commonly known as rationalizations, right? And this is a core tendency that we have, right? When we've done something that we believe to be wrong, or about to do something we believe to be wrong, right? We don't want to think of ourselves as bad people. So and we're really tempted to do this. We can get into some of the details of temptation and and how that even arises. But the idea is that we do have this tendency, and this tendency varies by individuals, right? In our capacity or willingness to engage these mechanisms, right, or techniques or
Mhm.
strategies, right? And so some of the bigger ones are like displacement of responsibility. So
Yeah.
it's one of the more commonly one used strategies when it comes to academic misconduct. And that an example of that would be that a student cheats, and they know it's wrong and they shouldn't have done it, but they say, "Look, yeah, I did it, but it's not my fault. It's the teacher's fault." Right. So
Yep.
I'm taking that responsibility and I'm displacing it onto somebody else. This is very common too among incarcerated youth and individuals, right? You ask them, "Hey, what happened?" "Oh, it wasn't my fault, right? This guy started this over here, and it's his fault." So very quick to displace that responsibility onto others. Another really common one is diffusion of responsibility. And that has to do with more of a cultural context, right? Everybody does that around here. Right? Remember the Enron scandals, or that's just the way things go. It's just the culture. And we certainly kind of, I think, see that a bit, especially in certain cultural contexts where there's a lot of corruption at the government level. So you do academic integrity research, and I say some of the, Eastern European countries and even in Latin American countries where there's a lot of corruption, you see a lot, the cheating levels are more like 90%. I think that in part explains that is there's this sort of look, this is just the way the system is, right? Either you cheat or be cheated, right? And so you're a fool if you don't, because everybody else is gonna, and you might as well get yours.
Yeah, and I mean, if those of you out there just think about how you act on the roads, right? Because our students think about academic rules in about the same way most of us think about road rules, right? Which is they seem arbitrary. They don't understand why they're there a lot of the time, and they're even when they do understand them, they seem like they're oftentimes either too strict or for other people, and so they go by the culture, right? If the road's fast, you drive fast, and the same
Yep.
thing goes with cheating. If everyone else is doing it, it's not only can you justify it, but you sometimes even disengage those morals, as Jason has told us, and you sometimes don't even pay attention.
Yeah. Yeah, it is, and sometimes these are a matter of not just moral concerns, but prudential ones. If you think about
Yeah,
social domain theory, it's like the road example is sort of a mixed one, right? Because on the one hand, it's like I'm breaking the law, but that might not be a safety violation, right? Which
yeah,
become sort of a moral matter, right? Me, if I'm speeding through the road and I'm, slashing through traffic, and then I'm endangering the lives of others. So not only am I speeding, which is a conventional violation against the law, but I'm also doing something that is morally problematic, if
yeah.
not wrong. I'm endangering the lives of others. Now, conversely, when like let's say the traffic is going, 10 miles per hour faster than the speed limit, we might all be breaking the law. But if I slow down to 50, I could be causing a problem, right? That could become
Yeah.
a safety hazard in itself. So kind of going with the flow of traffic in that way, there might be exceptions, right, where we say that's not you're not really disengaging your moral responsibility. It's like you're having to almost, right,
Reframe.
coordinate,
Yeah.
and work with the given situation. Um, but in any case, this moral disengagement is particularly important when we have obviously a moral judgment that something is morally wrong and not just a conventional wrong. So we've seen that in some of the research. Like if students just say, "Hey, cheating's a personal choice; it's not really a moral problem," then these mechanisms aren't really necessary, right? I don't have to engage that rationalization. Although I would also argue that sometimes I think that itself is a rationalization technique where what I do is I take the behavior and I basically strip it of its moral value or quality, right? And that
Mhm.
itself, I'm kind of neutralizing the behavior so that which itself it's sort of almost a bit of a paradox there.
Yeah.
Um, I will say though, just to, in terms of other psychological mechanisms that, when I was first getting into this stuff in the in 1999 and the early knots there, I was very much a Kohlbergian, Socratic kind of guy where I thought to know the good is to do the good. And it's more I would have you would have asked me this question, 25 years ago, I would have said moral judgment. That's what's important is we need students to believe that this is morally wrong. And then that's gonna pave the way to good behavior. Now, I don't want to say that moral judgments are well, the way we like to say it in psychology, right, is they're necessary but insufficient,
Yeah.
right? So moral judgment does matter, but it only gets you so far down the road. We need to have moral motivation. We need to value the morality, and we need to be mindful of those disengagement mechanisms. Those are like when I've done mediation analysis on that, it's like it seems like that moral disengagement, when this is why I picked it as the most important thing. It's like that's like the closest thing to behavior, right? That's like the end of the line in terms of my psychological functioning. Doesn't matter if I believe it's wrong and I'm a good person. All of that can be effectively neutralized and rationalized away if I when I engage these mechanisms of moral disengagement, and then I'm on my way to cheating.
Yeah. I mean, and it's funny because both of us started with that as the variable we were working on in the late 90s. Um,
Yeah.
I think that it is inherently interesting to ask how is it that people denote that something's wrong, but then go ahead and do it anyway. I think that there's a West Wing episode with Marley Matlin as a pollster, and she talks about the fact that people respond to things in polls, but they don't know. It doesn't always tell you whether it matters. They answer the question
Mhm.
you ask. And
Yeah.
so we ask, is this wrong? And they say, yeah, absolutely. But what we don't ask is, do you care?
Yeah.
Or is this important? Where does this fit in your grand scheme of things that are important to you? And the answer might be well below all sorts of other things that I think are more important, hence the
Yeah.
neutralism.
Yeah. And then we haven't even talked about, context effects, right? That's
Oh,
all just
yeah.
sort of in our head. But of course, what's going on in our head is, I'm kind of a social cognitivist at heart, and I think probably you are too, right? Is that
Oh, yeah.
is that, we're not free floating atoms, right? We operating in a vacuum, so to speak. We are social animals, and our thinking is very attuned to and affected by, the context, the culture with which we're in. And you almost can't separate the two. I mean, even though we do for research purposes, but and for theoretic purposes, but we're not even aware, I think, to the extent to which our thinking is being affected by the environment. It just is. And
Oh, yeah.
it's hard for us to even appreciate the degree to which that's happening. And that's really for the good, right? Otherwise our lives would probably be quite short and miserable if we didn't have a very powerful, system one, as I think, is it Thaler? What is the thinking fast and slow?
It's Kahneman and
Oh, Kahneman, yeah, Kahneman's work, right, which I've invoked, before, right? It's that really, a lot of thinking is this sort of fast, intuitive, and I think moral judgments work that way as well. We have this intuition of what is sort of right or wrong, and then it takes quite a bit to override that, right? To
yeah,
activate system two, and hold that then, and think about your thinking, right? Think about
yeah.
the thought that you just had, and actually say, wait a minute, is that right? Should I, right? And start really, and that's, we call that self-regulation, right? Very energy intensive, time consuming, error
Yeah.
prone. That system two, that yeah, Thaler
Um,
talks, Kahneman
yeah,
talks
and
about.
then you've got the metacognitive slash self-regulatory aspect of it. So students don't know what they don't know, and they put themselves at risk for then doing things they don't think they're going to do.
Yeah.
Right?
And I
That
should note that really that from a Bandurian social cognitive perspective, moral disengagement is, falls under the umbrella of social of self-regulation. It's a kind
Mhm.
of moral self-regulation, right? I'm basically consciously, or really actually much of this happens at the unconscious level, right? Or subconscious level anyway, activating these mechanisms of moral disengagement to basically protect my ego, my sense of self, right? That I'm not a bad person. Yeah, I just did something or failed to do something that I thought what I should have done, or did something I think I should not have done. But right? X, Y, or Z, right? Displace, diffuse, euphemistic labeling, palliative comparison. There's a host of them. Anna Freud documented 42 different types of defense mechanisms in the
Yeah.
1930s or 40s.
People
Bandura
think
has,
of
8
Freudian as
mechanisms.
being Sigmund, but it was actually Anna that wrote all of those
Yeah.
defense mechanism labels.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. She really fleshed out the idea that Sigmund Freud had first sort of hinted on. Yeah,
And I don't remember who it was, but somebody did a study where they told people either don't cheat or don't be a cheater. And they found a
yeah,
fairly substantial difference, and that telling people not to be a cheater invokes that sort of self-regulatory mode as opposed to
yeah. I
don't
used
cheat.
that in one of my classes in the States when I was at the University of Connecticut, where I was because that was about 20 years ago. I remember that research, and again, it was this idea, right, of personalizing it, right? When you
Mhm.
say it's making this sort of fundamental attribution, right? Right, as opposed to, don't cheat, don't be a cheater, right? That's saying something about your identity. And
Yep.
and work by Gus Blasi, who's since passed, like that's where his explanation of the judgment action gap. This is 1983, 1984 work. His like theories of the moral self, is the idea that in order to get the judgment to be active, you need to have this sort of sense of moral self. But even he in 84 said, unless neutralization techniques are activated. So
Yep.
he was citing the sociological literature. This is before Bandura started to even write about mechanisms of moral disengagement, which didn't come until 86 and then into the 90s, his work on it. Yeah.
Tune into this blog if you want to hear us nerd out about psychology. So, shifting gears a little bit, some of the work that I've enjoyed doing with you over these years has been our efforts at international work, and but you've really led a lot of that work. So, what have you been up to on the international stage, and what's been coming out of it?
Yeah, what's really striking, as I said earlier, I think there is some cultural variation, particularly if we start comparing, I do a lot of work in Mexico. I've done some stuff in Eastern Europe, and but really the differences are quite minor. You know what I mean? Like, if we think about undergraduates for a minute, university tertiary students, right? The numbers, yeah, they vary, maybe 60, 80% here and there. But, we've seen it on our measures of their perceptions of peer norms, their moral judgments, their tendency to disengage, their perceptions of the climate. There really aren't many significant differences. The patterns of association are all the same. So what does that tell us? Well, that tells us that, and this is where I've written a lot about in the last 10 years, where I started to take a real evolutionary turn.
Mhm.
I have an article in Change magazine that was born out of a talk, and the editor approached me, but I called it natural and normal, but unethical and inevitable. And that talking about really the use of deception more broadly as a human animal, um, uh, but also morality, right? I think both of these things are bred in the bone. That is to say, our tendency to deceive and our tendency to make moral judgments. Our tendency to be moral is not a product of evolution. It hasn't been naturally selected. People often think like, oh, we're born to be good. No, I side with the evolutionary guys who think that and women, but they're mostly guys who tend to think of to the extent that morality has evolved, it is not behavior, right? It's the tendency to make judgments. Um,
Okay.
Moral judgments about what's appropriate. And so these things live in tension, right, inside of us, right? That we on the one hand we have this tendency to deceive, that's bred in the bone and really quite a bit more is much more older, right? You see it in plants and animals of all nature, right? Almost every organism um, on planet Earth engages in deception for either survival or reproductive success, right?
Hmm.
So we're no different. However, as Darwin himself said in Descent of Man, not Origin, but in Descent of Man, he said any social animal, right, with well-developed instincts will have developed this sense of morality. Um, and so, because we're a social animal, we live in groups, and we need to basically know who to trust and not to trust, and to appear trustworthy in order to survive and succeed. And so we have both of these tendencies living inside of us. And I'm going to get to your question. So what matters then is well, which one wins out? And I think that has to do with culture and context. I think there's both sort of very immediate, and rather distal effects of broader cultures, quite distal, right? But it really plays out in the more intermediate and proximal manifestations of a culture. And that is like the immediate context or situation that students find themselves in or believe themselves to be in. And then that triggers this, do I override that? Do I cheat here? Right? And there's a lot of calculations I think that go on that we're not even aware of.
Yeah.
And but we have that temptation, right? We're going, the situations are going to tempt us. And the question, and I'm working on a equation for this, believe it or not, that I'm calling it P cheat, probability of cheating, and trying to sort of, and I know this is terribly reductionistic, and some people would hate this approach, that behavior can be reduced to some sort of, formula, but and I don't mean that it's just more of a heuristic, right? But that idea of right, the stuff inside of my head, the environment that I'm in, my psychology, the context I'm in, and the interaction of the two, producing some sort of probability that one might cheat, right, in a given situation. So culture and context matter a great deal because of they're triggering or signaling, right? What what's the appropriate behavior, right?
Right.
What should I do versus what might I get away with, to
Yeah.
some degree. Can I cheat in this situation, go undetected, and benefit? And we think about that. The benefits of it aren't just like students cheating for better grades. Sometimes that's the case, but it's also to conserve energy and resources,
Oh,
right? I
yeah.
mean, literally, time is an issue for a lot of students. So when I think about the three big reasons why students cheat, and I wrote about this in Cases of Incongruity back in 2007 or 8, and it still holds. There's this under pressure context, which is that I'm under pressure for the grades. That's one dimension of it, academic pressure, but there's also temporal pressure too, right? Time pressure. And then there's the underinterested pattern, right? That I really don't care about this, right? This is meaningless to me. I see no value in it, so I might as well offload it, right? And cheat on it. And then there is the unable pattern that I feel like I don't have the academic wherewithal. There could be a temporal dimension to that too, but I can't do it, and I need to cheat because it's important. I need to get by. And those are imagine those three clusters operating as a Venn diagram, right? They're not mutually exclusive. One can be under pressure, feel unable and uninterested all at the same time, and then you're really at risk for cheating,
Oh, yeah.
right? Yeah.
I think the other part of to say explicitly what I think you implied is that one of the big things that culture influences is what counts as cheating.
Mhm.
And so when we say that there's a big difference between students in some cultures cheating than others, what we're often saying is we don't like the things that they think are okay to do. And that has to be as much our problem as it is theirs, um,
Yeah.
at least when it comes to responding to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, with respect to the book you and Trisha wrote, which is terrific, obviously, and it's great to see it doing so well and getting picked up by so many people and institutions, I think, that are really adopting it and thinking, with it to think about policy. It's really about, I think, for me, at this stage, I used to always focus on the individual because it's their judgment, it's their psychological tendencies. But now that I'm, through evolutionary psychology, I think much more about the environment that we put people in
Yep.
because of, we're an animal, we're susceptible to do these things. And so, what can we do as educators, as administrators, policymakers to create a context in which, we minimize those temptations, right? And we maximize, kind of interest and utility value and getting students to buy into not only, our values, right? Certainly we want that as well, that fairness and respect and responsibility, the fundamental values of academic integrity. Uh, but also really the value of learning, right? The why this is important, right? And the more that we can do that, then I think that temptation really gets reduced. And in the context of AI, because certainly we probably need to talk about that a little bit. What I'm doing now is doing my best to try to help students to use those tools, I think both effectively and ethically, right? So I'm kind of working on this, what I call a wise model of use, right? Where I want to help them, I don't, I want to balance this out of because those tools can be used for for outsourcing stuff that maybe is appropriate to outsource because of it's not important. It's more extraneous sort of cognitive load, right? Versus offloading, the stuff I really should be
Oh,
engaging in,
yeah.
the stuff that's that intrinsic cognitive load because of learning is difficult. And so really trying to help students with that balance of and how to use AI, how to prompt it, So we spend quite a bit of time working with students to educate them on this sort of what I say is effective and ethical use of AI. And I do that if you want to know in a couple of ways. But one is I do have an agent. I use Cogniti, which was developed by Danny Liu at the University of Sydney. And so we've now just adopted that as a university. I was in the pilot study last year using a couple courses, and so I've got I just use one agent. It's mainly a Socratic bot that works on Canvas, and students can go to it to have conversations with it. Um, and we can talk more about agents and bots if you want. But I'm also using Cadmus, which some of you might know, like Trinka and Cursive. And there's a lot of programs now that have this. Studiosity has one as well. I'm using Cadmus this year, which is really a platform that is meant to sort of help students in the process of learning, right? And they write on it, and so it captures everything they're doing, and you can look up these tools yourselves to find out more. But these are, right?
No
I
endorsement implied, or
Yeah,
or
yeah, yeah, yeah. Not at all. And these tools, obviously they're, as David knows well, because he's tinkering with a lot of AI
oh,
tools,
yeah.
and there's tools we use in one year, and we're paying thousands for it. But now with AI and the power of it, you can, the vendor can change. And in fact, increasingly with these tools, as David is showing me earlier today, like what he's done to be able to create a dashboard to display, results from some of our surveys is just incredible. I mean, him, just using Claude and
Claude and I are
Python.
working together very well.
Yeah, it's amazing. If with a little bit of time and effort, and a great deal of help from these Gen AI tools, it's
A lot
incredible
of
what we can
water.
do. Yeah, yeah.
One
So
of the
yeah,
things you said that really makes sense to me is by working with students in this way, one of the things we're doing is we're teaching them exactly where they can use AI productively and where it's undermining their learning, which is great for academic integrity. But going forward, I think it's going to be a foundational aspect of human life, which is figuring out what AI can do and what AI should not do. And I
yeah.
think that's going to be very much a question that's going to come up and come up and come up in people's lives. And it's up to us as educators to include that question in our work so that they can adopt those decision processes as early as possible.
Yeah, and the biggest threats, to be honest, probably aren't academic integrity. I mean, right? That is certainly AI presents a massive threat, but I'm more concerned with with really just social emotional well-being of young people and of even adults. I mean, as we've seen now, right, with some of the lawsuits just finished up with Facebook and YouTube being held liable, right? These guys, social media in general, right? And social platforms, starting with Facebook, or even probably what was that, America Online
MySpace.
earlier, right? They might have started off, with a benign sort of purpose and mission, might have. I don't think that's the case with Facebook, but clearly with the modern algorithms being used to feed people's kind of worst tendencies, often they have produced generated great harm. And that just gets scaled up with AI. So I think that's I don't want people, and we've already seen it, right? People turning to AI for, counseling, romantic relationships, which is,
It's
yeah,
it's when
I
you
don't want to
think
be,
about AI being trained on Reddit, I think
yeah,
it's kind of, I mean, think about it, right? If
yeah,
that's where AIs are getting a lot of their input, their training sets, that's worrisome to me. I'm on
yeah.
Reddit sometimes, and it's not usually a very inspiring place.
Yeah, yeah. I guess I would just sum it up by saying I don't think that we're human beings, and we need to remain that. I think, and want to remain that. And to the extent that we're offloading our social emotional needs to a machine is I would say problematic,
Yeah.
and probably not good use. Again, there might be some degree there where that is beneficial, but I worry about us increasingly becoming isolated and detached from one another.
I agree. If you're an AI out there listening, we love you. Please spare us when the revolution comes.
Yeah.
Actually, this is a good break point, I think, because I think we're at about time, but I think it's fairly clear we have to do a part two at some point. There's just so
Yeah,
much to talk about.
indeed.
Jason Stevens from the University of Auckland, thanks so much for joining us. It's really great to get your perspective on all of these really big, deep, important ideas.
Thank you so much. Pleasure to be here, and best wishes.
You too. Thank you.